Test. Whoops. Too loud. Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is Friday evening, August 31st. Okay, so let's start with, in the traditional way, with three times the line of homage to the Buddha. I think almost all of you know it. If you don't, you just listen and follow along. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, so good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Abhidhamma retreat of 2018. Okay, so just sort of to recapitulate where we are at present, between the years 2013 and 2016, 13, 14, 15, 16, those 4 years over the Labor Day weekend, I gave Abhidhamma retreats based on what is taken to be the basic Abhidhamma manual, which is published under the title A Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma. And this is the sort of introduction to the Abhidhamma that's used pretty much everywhere in the Theravada Buddhist world. Even novices who are going to study the Abhidhamma usually begin by having to memorize the Abhidhammata Sangaha, and then they get the explanations later. Okay, so the comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma, the Abhidhammata Sangaha, presents in a very systematic way a summary, a very concise summary of all of the main principles of the Abhidhamma system of the Theravada school. Then, in order to continue this tradition of giving Abhidhamma retreats over Labor Day weekend, last year I decided to take the first chapters in the wisdom section of the Visuddhimagga. The Visuddhimagga is a large treatise on Theravada Buddhist doctrine and meditation, written in the 5th century in Sri Lanka by the monk Buddhaghosa. And it's divided into 3 main sections according to the 3 stages of the path: sila, or moral discipline; samadhi, concentration; and panya, wisdom. And the first chapters in the section on wisdom utilize the Abhidhamma method. And so it occurred to me that this could provide a suitable material for developing another Abhidhamma retreat. But what is interesting about those chapters at the beginning of the wisdom section in the Visuddhimagga is that they use or take the topics that are central to the Suta teaching on wisdom and present that material largely using the techniques, the analytical techniques that are the distinctive of the Abhidhamma. And so that particular section of the Visuddhimagga is called, in Pali, it's called Panya Bhumi. And Bhumi means the ground, or Nyanamoli translated it as the soil. And panya, of course, is wisdom. So this is the ground or basis for developing panya or wisdom, or it's the soil in which wisdom takes root and out of which wisdom grows. And so the topics of those chapters are the 5 aggregates, the sense bases and elements, the faculties and 4 noble truths, and dependent origination. And so last year, I took the first of those chapters, which is chapter 14 of the Visuddhimagga, devoted to the 5 aggregates. And of course, the 5 aggregates is a very basic sutta teaching. But the Visuddhimagga, as we saw last year, uses the Abhidhamma analysis of matter in order to explain the Rupa Khandha, the aggregate of material form. And it uses the Abhidhamma analysis of the mind into a great number of individual mental states called chittas in order to explain the Vijnana Khandha, the aggregate of consciousness. And then it uses the Abhidhamma concept of the Chaitasikas, the mental factors, there are 52 mental factors, so it uses those 52 mental factors in order to explain the aggregates of feeling, perception, and the mental formations or volitional activities. And so we saw that feeling is just one of those Chaitasikas. Perception, sanya, is another of those Chaitasikas or mental factors. And then the aggregate of volitional activities comprises the other 50 mental factors. And so in this way, the Visuddhimagga uses the Chaitasikas or mental factors of the Abhidhamma to explain the middle 3 aggregates. And it goes into great detail, much greater detail than the suttas, in explaining the aggregate of volitional activities or volitional formations. And then what's maybe distinctive of the Visuddhimagga is that it shows which particular mental factors are present in each of the chittas that make up the aggregate of consciousness. So if you were here, then you understand what I explained last year. It's just a review. Who was here last year? Quite a good number, quite a good number. Okay, so this year we will be going on to chapter 15 in the Visuddhimagga, which explains sense bases and elements, and then into chapter 16, which explains the indriyas, the 22 faculties, and the 4 noble truths. And what I'm going to do this year is to present this material from the 2 complementary perspectives, from the perspective of the suttas and from the perspective of the Abhidhamma, so we can get like a double perspective on these fundamental topics. Because there are, as we'll see, that there are sometimes like subtle differences, even I'd say some discrepancies, even some degree of tension between explanations in the suttas and explanations that come in the Abhidhamma and the commentaries like the Visuddhimagga. And so when we study these topics from these 2 different points of view, then we can see where they converge, how the Abhidhamma elaborates and treats in a much more sort of technical and precise way the material in the suttas, and where there are some differences in approach between the two modes of investigation. And it might seem that the explanations and studies that we'll be doing in the course of this retreat, that this is purely theoretical. It might seem somewhat abstract, but I think that would be a misunderstanding, because this is the material, as I said, that one has to investigate when one develops insight. The development of insight is insight precisely into the nature of such things, categories like the 5 aggregates, the 12 sense bases, the 18 elements. So this is what one has to see with insight. And in order to prepare the ground for that insight to arise, one has to have some idea of the material that one has to investigate with insight. Probably for most people, it doesn't have to be as detailed and as technical as one finds it in the Abhidhamma, but in any case, the more one studies this material in detail, analytically, even if one doesn't have to utilize all of it, but it trains the mind to be able to examine this subject matter. And so in the Buddhist tradition, we speak about 3 stages in the development of wisdom. So we speak about Sutamaya Panya, which is the wisdom that arises through learning, through study and investigation of the text, or actually the study of the text, and listening to discourses and explanations of the text. Then the next stage in the development of wisdom is called Chintamaya Panya. That's the wisdom or understanding that arises through reflection and examination. So after you learn the material, then you investigate it, you study it, you reflect on it in order to get a clear understanding of the meaning of the material, the principles that are being conveyed by the text. And so in this way you integrate this material into your own way of thinking. And then the third stage in the cultivation of wisdom is the Bhavana Maya Panya. That is the wisdom that arises through mental development, specifically through the cultivation or the practice of meditation, insight meditation. Okay, so starting tomorrow morning, I'm going to take the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification chapter on the sense bases, and then the chapter on the elements. Actually, they're both in the same chapter. But this evening, what I want to do, by way of an introduction to this material, to look at a number of suttas on the 6 sense bases. Tomorrow we're going to take much more sutta material on the 6 sense bases. But now I want to look into the 6 sense bases in order to see what is the place of this teaching in the Buddha's, in the body of the Buddha's doctrine. Why does the Buddha place so much stress on the 6 sense bases? And when I use this expression, 6 sense bases, is there anybody who doesn't know what I'm speaking about? Okay. Is that so, or you're just doing that? Okay. Okay, so the 6 sense bases are we also call them the six sense faculties: the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. So those are usually understood as the five sense organs. And then there's the internal sense base, which is the mind base. And tomorrow we'll look into the meaning of this word, the Pali word ayatana. But now we're just going to accept this term, the six sense bases. Is this visible to the people in the back? Okay, so I'm going to begin with a short sutta or discourse that occurs in the Anguttara Nikaya, and also the same discourse occurs in the Samyutta Nikaya. This is called the Rohi Tessa Sutta. Yeah, that's very useful, thank you. So it's named after the person or the being to whom the discourse is spoken. Okay, so the sutta begins when the Buddha is living at his familiar residence, the monastery of Anathapindika at Savatthi. Okay, then one night, deep in the middle of the night, when the Buddha keeps awake during the middle part of the night, when everybody else is asleep, at that time when everything is quiet, then the devas or the deities from different heavenly realms come down to the human realm to visit the Buddha in order to converse with him and to ask him questions. So this night, this young deva named Rohi Tessa, described as one of stunning beauty, he comes down with his radiance illuminating the entire monastery. He approaches the Buddha, he pays homage to the Buddha, to a human being who is superior even to the devas. And he asks him a question. This is a sort of 5th century BC version of, is it NASA that's investigating space travel? Or Elon Musk, is he the one who's been building rocket ships? Okay, so he's asking, is it possible by traveling to know, see, or reach the end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old and die, where one doesn't pass away and take rebirth? So in a way, this is sort of the aspiration of Indian spirituality in the Buddha's time, to reach a state where one is free from old age, sickness, and death, from this beginningless, perpetual process of passing away and getting reborn again and again. And that state where one is free from birth, old age, and death, that is the state of vimukti, or liberation, towards which the various spiritual contemplatives in the Buddha's time aspired. And this deity thought somehow that it's possible to reach the end of the world by traveling. And so he asked the Buddha whether it's possible by going beyond this solar system, beyond we're in this solar system, beyond other stars, beyond the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, beyond galaxies upon galaxies. Is it possible to reach that end of the world where one will find liberation? Okay, then the Buddha replies and he says, I say that by traveling, one cannot know, see, or reach that end of the world where one is not born, doesn't grow old and die, doesn't pass away and take rebirth. So at this point, if you look at it, just if you stop here, it seems like the Buddha is saying that there's no way out. We're stuck with perpetual aging, sickness, death, and rebecoming, repeated existence. Okay, when the Buddha says this, then this deity says it's astounding and it's amazing how well that was stated by the Buddha, and then he repeats the Buddha's statement. Then he says that in the past, that he was a seer. Apparently at that time he had been a human being, a kind of rishi, or like a yogi, who also had the same name, Rohi Tessa, who had psychic powers. And he was able to travel through space. And then the wish came to him that I want to reach the end of the world. So he said, I want to reach the end of the world. And he thought that the way to reach the end of the world is by traveling. And so he says, I traveled for 100 years without pausing except to eat and sleep, and yet I died along the way without having reached the end of the world. Okay, now the Buddha, in a sense, now he corrects or expands upon his original reply to the deity, Rohi Tassa. He says, by traveling, one cannot reach the end of the world, where one is liberated from birth, old age, and death. But he says, without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of suffering. So if we want to make an end of suffering, we do have to reach the end of the world, but we can never reach the end of the world by traveling. You know, maybe sort of the underlying sort of unexpressed or even unrecognized motivation behind humanity's development of space travel. You know, we traveled to the moon, at least we got there, was it 1969? We ascending vehicles to Mars, to other planets in the solar system, even, I think, space vehicles. Have we sent them beyond our solar system? Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But eventually we hope to travel to other galaxies, maybe other other galaxies, maybe beyond our galaxy, beyond this whole constellation of galaxies, all in the hope that there we will find an end, somehow that paradisical end to old age, sickness, and death. But the Buddha says it's not by traveling that one can reach that end of the world where one is free from old age, sickness, and death. But he says, without having reached the end of the world, one won't be free from suffering. So how does one reach the end of the world? Here the Buddha says, it is in this body, 6 feet or so high, endowed with perception and mind. that I proclaim the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way leading to the cessation of the world. Okay, so far we've spoken about the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way leading to the cessation of the world. But what exactly is meant by the world? What is, you could say, what is the worldhood of the world? Somehow, we always think somehow that the world is something out there, and somehow just through a freak chance, somehow I got thrown into this world. You know, things could have been a little different and I wouldn't be here. Maybe if my mother and father didn't meet, where would I be? And so we think what's real is, you know, concrete, solid things like this earth, the trees, mountains, rivers, clouds. And of course we think of this body, this physical body, insofar as it's a material object, as being part of the world. But we take this physical body just to be a kind of chance byproduct of physical processes, of physical and chemical processes and biological processes. So we are just sort of a chance intruder upon a world that's completely cold, external to us, indifferent to us. But the Buddha looks at the world from a different point of view. And to see that, we can go to the next sutta. And this sutta begins with the Buddha making that same statement that he addressed to the deity in the previous sutta. He says, I say that the end of the world can't be known, seen, or reached by traveling, but without reaching the end of the world, there is no making an end to suffering. Okay, having made that statement, he then gets up and leaves. He goes into his cottage. Okay, so after the Buddha leaves, then the monks start discussing. You know, they couldn't understand the Buddha's statement. And so they would start discussing, how are we going to understand that? The Buddha is gone and we don't have the patience to wait till next time he comes to ask him. And so who will explain the meaning of this statement? And then they consider the Venerable Ananda, who is the Buddha's attendant, very learned. And so they decide to ask him about that statement. And so they go to the Venerable Ananda and ask him for an explanation. And Ananda first refuses and says, why are you asking me? I'm not very knowledgeable. You should have asked the Buddha himself. But the monks prevail on Ananda, and finally he agrees. And then he says, I understand the meaning of that brief statement as follows: that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world and a conceiver of the world, that is called the world in the Noble One's discipline. And then he raises the question, and what is that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world? And then he answers in terms of the 6 sense bases. So the I is something in the world, So it's in the world, but it's by virtue of the I that one is a perceiver of the world and a conceiver of the world. So the I opens up the world to us and makes it available to us through perception, and then building upon all of those sense data that come flooding in through the eyes and that are perceived by the activity, the perceptual activity of the mind. All of that perceptual material then gets turned over to the mind faculty, which then builds up and elaborates on the perceptual data, and so it constitutes the world that is present to us. And the same happens through the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind as the internal faculty, that faculty that has its own data, the purely mental objects, that perceives those objects and then elaborates upon them. And so in that way, the world gets constituted through the activities of the senses, the sense bases, which are things within the world. So they are things within the world that sort of take in, absorb, suck in the mass of processes that are going on around us that are available, so all of the visible data that are available, or the audible data, auditory data, or the smells, tastes, tactile sensations, as well as mental reflections, images, thoughts, ideas. Takes all of those, and then putting all of that together, it constitutes a world for us. And so the way I think of this to myself, like we occupy this particular world because we have particular sense bases or sense faculties that are responsive to form, sounds, odors, and so on in a particular way. And so, okay, does anybody have the Abhidhamma book with them? Just hold it up. Okay, so what is she holding up here? Okay, I'll just hold it up. Okay, what am I holding up? What? Okay, a book. It's an Abhidhamma book. Okay, so wait, okay. If I'm interested, I look at this book, I see type with sentences, with different meanings, and so I get interested, I read it, I build up an understanding. I'm understanding Abhidhamma through this book. I'm finished. Okay. When I was living in Sri Lanka, some of you might have heard this already, so we had a bookcase up against the wall, and one of the great problems in living in a forest monastery in Sri Lanka and keeping books is that there's a little creature called termites that come up, somehow they would find openings in the wall, maybe between the wall and the floor, and they build these tunnels and they come up behind the bookcase. And so every once in a while, when I would pull out a book, the book will just turn to sawdust in my hand and fall to the floor. And then inside the book, we see these tunnels, and there are the little creatures nibbling away. Okay, so in my world, those things were books. But in the world of the termite, with its different perceptions and different conceptions, those things were not books for reading, but they were food, sources of food. And what I found interesting, actually, was the books that they would go to for some reason were the Abhidhamma books. Though I overheard some of them speaking to each other, and they said, this material is hard to digest. Why don't these monks keep any novels? So, mystery or romance novels. Okay, so Ananda says, that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world. Oh, I went through that already. So it's the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. That is, okay, the mind is, the six sense spaces are that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world and a conceiver of the world. So that is called the world in the discipline or the teaching of the Noble One. So the Buddha is not concerned with the question of whether there's an objective world out there, apart from our perceptions and conceptions. Though probably, looking at this from a scientific point of view, when we consider what is actually out there are just whole, bands, at least from the standpoint of vision, are bands along vibrations along an electromagnetic spectrum. Various electromagnetic processes taking place, and those are completely beyond the sphere of our perception. Many are beyond the range of our perception, but our perception just focuses in upon a very limited band within that spectrum of electromagnetic vibrations, and takes that and turns it into colors and shapes, and out of that we construct a picture of the world. And the same with sounds. Even when I speak, what's actually taking place are vibrations of the air. And I'm not speaking meaningful words as such. The vibrations of the air are not meaningful words. But your eardrum picks up those vibrations of the air, turns them into sounds which are perceived in one part of the brain, and then another part of the brain serves as the base for turning those sounds and interpreting them as words with meaning. And then another part strings the individual words together to get meaningful sentences. Okay, so this is the meaning of the world in the discipline of the Noble One, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And this is not only the world, but as we're going to see, it also is part of the origin of the world, which comes out in the next sutta. This is from the Sutta Nipata, the Hemavata Sutta. In this sutta, it's another type of supernatural being called the yaksha. The yaksha is a sort of, often they're like violent spirits, but these are good, benevolent spirits who come to the Buddha. And then one of them presents the Buddha with a series of riddles. He says, in what has the world arisen? In what does it form intimacy? Having clung to what is the world, afflicted in regard to what? Okay, then the Buddha answers with a riddle. He says, in 6 the world has arisen. In 6 or with 6 it forms intimacy. Having clung to 6, by clinging to 6, the world is afflicted in regard to 6. So in 6, the world has arisen. That is, the world arises through the 6 sense bases, as we're going to see from the next sutta. It's through the activity that takes place through the 6 sense bases that we create the conditions that build up not only the world present to us here and now, but the conditions that will build up a recurrence of the world over and over as we go from birth to death and from death to new birth. And we see this in the next sutta, which is a straight sutta that the Buddha gives on the origin and passing away of the world. Okay, so here the Buddha says, I'm going to teach you the origin and passing away of the world. And so now he goes into the exposition and he says, what is the origin of the world? So in dependence on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. And as we see here, the I is what is technically is called the internal sense base. And the forms, the visible forms, are the external sense base. So that's why they're called bases, ayatana, because these are the bases from which consciousness arises. It's on the basis of the I and forms that I consciousness arises. And so the Buddha takes consciousness, we usually think of consciousness as being one kind of unitary whole, but the Buddha breaks consciousness down into these 6 types. Each type arises in dependence upon its own distinctive internal base, here the I, and external base, the visible forms. And so on the basis of the I and forms, I consciousness arises. Then the meeting of these 3 is contact. So that is a distinct event, contact. It's not just the impinging of the form on the I, but it's that event that occurs when the mind or I consciousness contacts the form through the I. And then with contact as the condition, then feeling arises. The contact is a condition, it's an immediate condition for a particular feeling, either a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, a neutral feeling. Okay, so this much up to the arising of feeling is technically, we would say, that is the input, or that is what occurs passively as part of the passive process of cognition. That is just inevitable. As long as we have a body with our sense faculties and are awake, we're going to be making contact with different objects through the senses. But now comes the event that marks the origination of the world, of another cycle of the world. And this is the arising of craving. So craving then becomes the response to the data that come in through the senses. So there's usually, if there's a pleasant or agreeable form, then there'll be a pleasant feeling and then a craving for the continuation of that pleasant feeling and a craving to continue to enjoy that pleasant form. And so that intensification of craving then becomes clinging. And the clinging is the holding tightly to the agreeable form and clinging to the pleasant feeling. And then through that clinging, we set in motion the process of generating activities that have the ability, the potential to bring about a renewal of existence in the future. So clinging becomes the condition for the production of a new existence in the future. And then with existence as condition, then comes the descent at death, the descent into the womb again, and then the event of birth, and then conditioned by birth, a new life begins, culminating in old age and death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. So that, the Buddha says, that is the origin of the world. And then the same kind of pattern is developed with regard to the other 5 sense faculties. And so it's this, the way we respond to the data of the senses, when we respond with craving and clinging, we create the conditions for a new world, well, that is for coming back into the world. And when we come back into the world, we come back and we bring along a new set of 6 sense faculties. And through that new set of 6 sense faculties, again, we start experiencing the world again. And then we respond to the agreeable with craving and clinging, to the disagreeable with aversion and ill will, to the neutral with delusion and ignorance. And in that way, we start building up another cycle of worldly existence. And to gain liberation from the world, the passing away of the world, okay, this is what the Buddha referred to earlier as the cessation of the world. Here again, he speaks of, starts off with that same process. I and forms, I consciousness arises. Again, there's contact. Again, with feeling. It says with feeling as condition. Okay, craving arises, sort of that's the natural reaction to, especially to pleasant feeling. But then, with the fading away and cessation of craving, sort of that is the juncture, the point, you say the fragile point where one breaks the cycle, with craving arising in response to feeling. So with the fading away and cessation of craving, then comes cessation of clinging. With cessation of clinging, cessation, the end of that process of building up a new existence. And with the end of that process of building up a new existence, then there is no more birth, no new birth. And when there's no more birth, then there's no more aging and death, sorrow, grief, and so on. So that is the cessation of the whole mass of dukkha, of suffering. And that, the Buddha says, is the passing away of the world. Okay, and so the Buddha takes it as the task because we could see how the world originates through the six sense bases, through our activity that arises through the six sense bases, and how liberation depends upon eliminating craving and clinging in regard to the six sense bases. So what the Buddha's path leads to is the development of that kind of wisdom that will put an end to craving, to the craving and clinging. And the area where that wisdom has to operate, that domain that wisdom focuses on, is precisely the six sense bases. And so here in this sutta is called Fully Understanding the All. The Buddha says, without directly knowing and fully understanding everything, that's sabbang, the all, without developing dispassion towards it and abandoning it, one is incapable of eliminating suffering. One cannot reach liberation from suffering. And so what is that all, the everything, that one has to know directly and fully understand? He continues, without directly knowing and fully understanding the I, without developing dispassion towards it and abandoning it, abandoning craving and clinging to the I, one cannot eliminate suffering. And so without directly knowing and fully understanding forms, eye consciousness, eye contact, and the feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact, one cannot eliminate suffering. And so through the other senses. But it's by directly knowing and fully understanding everything. You don't have to memorize Wikipedia to understand everything, but one develops insight, direct insight about the nature of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and the mind, and about forms, sounds, odors, tastes, tactile objects, and mental objects. It's by fully understanding, or by directly knowing and fully understanding that all, that one develops this passion and becomes liberated from it, and in that way reaches the end of dukkha, the end of suffering. Okay, maybe this will do for sort of introductory presentation. And if there's any questions, then please feel welcome to ask. Maybe we have about 10 minutes for questions. I'll stand up so people can see me more easily. And if you remember, I have 4 rules about asking questions. Let me see if I can remember them. Okay, first, when you ask the question, stand up, then I could see you clearly. Speak directly into the microphone, so the sound will be amplified, so everybody else can hear. Third rule about questions, the question should be pertinent to the subject matter. And fourth, the question should be concise. If anybody wants to give a lecture, I'm happy to sit down in the audience. But to keep it, the questions flowing, keep the question concise and precise. Okay, so please. Okay, Suki, I think Suki is tentatively holding her hand.
Bhante, in Himavata Sutta, there is a word intimacy. In what does it form intimacy?
Yeah.
And could you explain what intimacy?
Yeah, the Pali word is santava, which is also used for intimacy in human relations. So I think the sense here is that it's through the 6 sense bases that one forms intimacy with the 6 sense objects, that you get to know the 6 sense objects, and then of course through the influence of craving and clinging that one then becomes attached to the 6 sense objects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask just one more question, please? In the all, the Samyutta Nikaya Sutta, the second paragraph, if anyone, having rejected this all, I shall make known another all, that would be a mere empty boast on his part.
Yeah.
Could you, it's a little hard to understand what it means.
Yeah, I have to say for me also it's a little hard to I take it as just a kind of rhetorical way to emphasize the importance of those things as being the all. So in that sutta, I didn't explain the sutta, but I'll put it on the wall. Okay, so he says, I will teach you the all. So this is the, you say that this is the everything that the Buddha's teaching is concerned with, in a way. The eye and forms, the ear and sounds, the nose and odors, tongue and taste, the mind, the body and tactile objects, the mind and mental objects. And though the Buddha says, this is interesting, he says, having rejected this all, I shall make known another all. So it seems like this incorporates everything. And tomorrow we'll see that that becomes a standpoint of the Abhidhamma. But if you look at the next sutta that I brought up, you see that there are other things besides those 6 internal bases and external sense bases. Besides them, there is the contact. There are the 6 types of consciousness. Okay, so here we have consciousness, we have contact, we have feeling. So we actually have many, many other things that don't fit neatly into those 12 dharmas.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Bhante, I sort of understand what they're explaining here, but the use of the term beginning of the world or the end of the world, even though we may attain enlightenment by understanding this paticcasamuppada and the contact, feeling, whatever, but the world goes on.
Yeah.
And the universe, cosmos goes on.
Yeah.
So to me, I mean, the two, I can't put them together. Because we are talking in terms of attaining enlightenment, actually, as the end of the world.
Yeah. But don't forget what the Buddha is speaking about as the world. In a way, utilizing what I would call objectivist way of thinking about the world. So what the Buddha speaks about as the world are the six sense bases.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, so when the liberated one passes away, the six sense bases cease and don't arise again. And so for the liberated one, there's no more world.
Yeah, you're right, yes.
But for those who remain behind,
Right.
have their six sense bases or whatever number of sense bases they have, they will be perceiving the world, and the world will be present for them.
Yeah, thank you, Bhante.
Okay, over here with a blue shirt.
I have the mic. Should I go?
Oh, you have it already. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Bhante, just a quick one. Loka Vidu, knower of worlds, is this what is being referred to?
Yeah, one could say that, yeah.
And knowing and directly knowing and fully understanding, is that the same as Sampajanya or no?
No.
It's not,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, with the blue shirt.
Hello, Bhante.
Yeah. Maybe if people who speak say their names, then I can.
Oh, sure. Fang Len Ang. You spoke before about the three feelings of pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Can you explain to me why neither painful nor pleasant feeling is considered ignorance and delusion? And can you give me an example?
First, the neither painful nor pleasant feeling is not considered ignorance.
Oh,
No, that is not the case.
okay.
What one could say is that, okay, there are three unwholesome roots, and those three unwholesome roots, you could say, are coordinated with the three different types of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So the unwholesome root of greed or craving is associated with pleasant feeling. The unwholesome root of aversion or hate, ill will is associated with, coordinated with painful feeling. And then the feeling which is neither painful nor pleasant is usually not recognized, not known, because it's more subtle than the other two. So that, because it's not known, it's said to be associated with ignorance.
Oh.
Yeah, but it's not ignorance itself.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
going to go into this more tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Venerable.
Hello, Bhante.
Yeah.
This is a question you mentioned in the beginning, the like samsara, that in India, the idea was you want to get out of the cycle.
Yeah.
So in the West, with this idea of birth, in the Paticca Samuppada, a lot of people, if they understand it as birth, not as taking like a rebirth, and understanding it more as identity, that like a kind of becoming, like it's like a new self. Do you find this is skillful or acceptable within the Buddha's kind of his teaching?
I would say one might be able to use it as an analogy, maybe to make people understand how, how they can develop different identities. And so you could, I would say that one could use it as a means for making people get some sense of the way Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination, works. But if one says that that is the meaning of birth that the Buddha intended in Paticca Samuppada, then I say that that's not correct. We have very clear definitions of birth in dependent origination, which is also the same as the definition of birth in the Four Noble Truths, which I think we'll come to on Sunday.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more question. Oh, I see two hands. Okay, so we'll take two more questions. Then we'll go for the meditation.
I guess my confusion arises, I'm Gary, by the way, from, all right, so to escape the world, we need to come to complete understanding. I guess my issue is that in doing this, in trying to escape in the first place, like, I guess I see a bit of a paradox, because in that, in and of itself, isn't that aversion to, you know, the life, the suffering, all that, and it just seems self-contradictory. I don't know, there's something I'm missing.
Maybe stick around till we come to the class, the part of the program on the Four Noble Truths, then things will become clearer there. Because it takes like an elaborate explanation. And now I just want to to close up the evening program with quick questions. Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Bhante. Paul, just this brief taste feels so healing. Can we wake up listening to these truths like at any time?
Not just by listening, one has to go on with the sequential course of practice till it reaches maturity. But I think it will start to open up the eye of understanding as one listens. Okay, I think we'll end now the talking part of the program for the evening, and then we can move over to the meditation section, and we'll do a sitting